Hello, everyone, and welcome to Sweating the Small Stuff, a show where we sweat over the details that make our world richer. I'm your personal brain trainer, Cameron Boozarjomehri, and today I'm joined by two exceptionally special guests. You've already heard from the incredible cybersecurity expert himself, Bruce Snell, but today we're joined by another incredible member of the Hackable team and one of my favorite podcasters, Geoff Siskind. Geoff, would you like to introduce yourself?
I just want to say that was the kindest introduction anybody, including like my own wife, has ever had for me. So I love you, Cameron. I think this is.
Oh my God!
I know. We've really just met, but I feel a deep, full love for you and your show. So thank you. I appreciate this.
I don't want to make comparisons, but I feel like his introduction of you, Geoff, is kind of how you should be introducing me on Hackable.
We'll see about that. We'll discuss that offline, Bruce. And this is also lovely, Cameron, because I'm sure, as you know, with your show, podcasting is such an abstract thing where you just sit, speaking into a microphone largely by yourself. So it's lovely that, at least one person listens. So I appreciate that. I appreciate you.
And I really do appreciate the incredible opportunity to get to talk to all of you about this exact thing, because I feel like Hackable in no small way inspired me with my show, because Hackable was the show that I always liked information security and computer science and whatnot in general. Mm-hmm. And this was a show where you took common tropes from TV and cinema, especially when it was done well, which was very, I imagine, hard to find until Mr. Robot came along.
Yes.
And you figured out ways to piece it together into this much grander context where we're seeing like this isn't just like something that people like to point to in TV and movies. This is a thing that can happen to anyone anywhere if you're not watching out for it.
Yeah, completely. And I think Bruce is the smarter one of the two of us, and so these things come as less of a surprise to him, but to me, I'm very much an average consumer in many ways, and I like all these cool, smart things. And before doing the show, I was pretty naive about what the potential was of these things to have an impact on my life and my security. And it's really, not only has it made me paranoid about almost everything, but it's just sort of made me question why I need these things in my life and whether or not it's actually a good idea to have everything in your house smart or not.
Well, and the reason I like this is because, I think computer security, obviously it's a very important topic, but I think the average person, that if you're not in the industry, you don't necessarily need to know all the ins and outs. But if you start hearing people tell you about how dangerous these things are without actually breaking it down and explaining it, using layman's terms, then it just becomes this kind of big scary monster that you just kind of forget about. So I think that the thing I like most about doing this podcast is that we get to take these things that are very serious, these security issues that are very serious, explain it in a way that, my in-laws would understand, and kind of help people become better informed.
And I think I would like to applaud you both for giving me a perfect example of the synergy that seems to be on the show. There's a lot of, what does this look like in the real world in terms of the actual technology that, Bruce, you do? Whenever you're on, you seem to be able to get right into the area right between the lay and the nitty gritty. And then to help balance that out in the show, obviously, Geoff, the person being hacked, goes ahead and shows us like, this is the normal day. This is my day as a normal person living in the modern digital world, making my way. And then all of a sudden, my teapot and coffee machine have been hacked, and I don't know what to do anymore.
Yeah, and it's always like, I would think after doing this show for as many episodes as we have, and I would say this if I wasn't myself, that I'm perpetually surprised at how surprised I am. And the teapot and coffee pot was a perfect example because, the idea of a smart teapot, oh, that's super cool. I'd love to be able to, I work on the third floor, and I'd love to be able to set my teapot when it's time to go, and then I can go downstairs in a couple of minutes and have a hot cup of tea. And I wouldn't necessarily think that the teapot would be vulnerable in such a disastrous way unless I had seen it firsthand.
Right.
And so I get this weird education constantly, and then Bruce gets to come along and tell me, I told you so. And then ultimately give me tools. That's what I like about the show. Ultimately give me tools so that I'm not just a sitting duck all the time.
For anyone listening, episode 26, Malicious Brews, is actually the one we're referencing, where they had a head-to-head competition of which was more hackable. Was it a smart coffee machine and a smart teapot?
Yeah.
Where the teapot was just heating water.
Well, and this was one of these crazy ones. We had never done this before. It was an experiment for us. Is normally on the show, we do one device and a hacker comes to hack me in some weird way. And this time we actually decided to do a competition where we had two hackers at the same time trying to hack different devices in my house, but to see which was more disastrous. And, on the show, we kind of in jest declared one a winner. But the truth is they were both disastrous and creepy and invasive in ways that you would have never thought, because what I'm constantly learning is it's not just the device, it's what the device can tunnel into and ultimately leave yourself vulnerable for.
Well, I mean, I think a perfect example is when I lived in Tokyo, we had, as you would expect, a very high-tech bathroom, right? And I had a little app that I could use on my phone to control my bathtub. Right. So I could, at the end of Aikido practice, I knew I had like a 40-minute train ride home. I could set my bath to be at 34 degrees or whatever, and at the certain level that I wanted, and click go, and it would fill up and be prepared. But the thing is, it's one of those where that's a great convenience, and I loved having it. But every time I used it, I was like, oh my goodness, what have I just opened up, right? What are some potential issues that I could be letting somebody come in to my network through my smart bathtub?
Before we get too far down all the different rabbit holes, I kind of want to take a moment to step back and ask about the show as a whole. Like, where did it come from, and what was, I'm guessing a lot of this inquisitive thinking you had about your day-to-day life, I imagine, went a lot into fueling what eventually became Hackable.
Well, Hackable, there's a bunch of great people behind Hackable, and Bruce and I are kind of the voices of it, but there's some really great minds. McAfee wanted to do something to show the world about virus scanning, and they're known for amazing virus protection, all that good stuff, but a way to have people like me that don't think about it very much think about it for the first time. And so they teamed up with Response Marketing, which is an amazingly creative agency, and a company called Pacific Content to develop the show. And ultimately, if I remember this correctly, Bruce, I think you were going to be sort of the main host. I think you were involved before I was. And then we realized quickly that in order for the show to work, we needed somebody who, to insult myself, wasn't particularly smart, and we need to be teaching somebody, and so I came out of the woodwork as that person who basically could be the opposite of Bruce, in that I'm constantly doing the wrong things, and in real life installing malware on my computer, and generally I like technology, but I don't want to read the instruction manual, so I'm a perfect foil to get myself in trouble. And that's what happens on the show.
Sorry, if I could just jump in. I didn't mean to at all discount the incredible effort and group of individuals that go into making Hackable. And if you'd like to give, especially the ones who probably don't get as much attention, if you'd like to give them a little shout out, I'd appreciate that too, because I'm making my own podcast myself most of the time, and it can be very time consuming. So I can only begin to imagine the effort it takes to make the professional product that is Hackable.
Yeah, and we really have amazing partners. Having the team of McAfee, basically present this website has been incredible. And not only are they amazing on sort of the technical side, but on the creative side as well. And both Response Marketing and Pacific Content are kind of class leaders in their fields, and everybody has really come together. And Hackable has become a true labor of love that we all love making, because it's fun and surprising for all of us involved.
It was really interesting to, as we kind of were kicking off this idea internally at McAfee, we had done a few things, doing some videos, some very I did a series of short 1.5 minute videos explaining the basics of security to, kind of the layperson. And it was really cool to have this opportunity to kind of take that to a different level. And I think bringing Geoff on was the perfect kind of complement to that, because it gave us somebody to talk to, right? Geoff kind of represents I'm not working with McAfee anymore, but at the time, Geoff represented the customer, right? Or the consumer. And so it was really good to have somebody that, we could talk to, that, we could use as kind of the foil for why are these things important to you? And I think Geoff does a really good job of coming across as being that everyman.
I also like to applaud McAfee as a whole for the marketing genius of the show, because I think that is kind of the big thing, is you don't always appreciate why it's like insurance, I guess. Like, you don't always appreciate why you need it until it happens. And you guys do an excellent job of showcasing this is what's probably going to happen when it happens. So why not get it now before you need it?
Right. Right.
As part of that, I was curious, when you were starting off, I know like lots of creative endeavors, they kind of start in one place. As you pointed out before, it was going to originally be Bruce, and then you realize you need the lay person. I want to, as a person trying to figure out his own way, building his own show, what was that process like, getting to the point where you realized this is the lay user, this is the thing that we don't think is really connecting?
This was actually, it was almost stereotypical in that we had, a number of meetings with a bunch of people, kind of spitballing ideas back and forth, and, lots of things being written on the whiteboard. And I'm never one for wanting to have meetings more than 3 people, just because I just think they never actually get anything done. I had a saying that was, more than 3, not for me. But this was actually a really, really cool project in that we sat around and we're just, it was one of those where everyone was free to just kind of start putting out ideas about what would be the way to go and what would be an interesting concept. And, it took a number of them before we even came to the concept of doing a podcast. And then we brought, the Pacific Content people in, and they sat down and they were talking about, the success they've had with other podcasts in the past. And we kind of just rolled with that and figured out what would be the best way to approach that and to bring security into play.
Geoff, were you part of Pacific Content?
Yeah, so Pacific Content is the company I work for, and we make a number of podcasts, across the industry for and work with various different brands to help them make the podcasts. And part of my background before joining Pacific Content is I spent about a decade show running reality TV shows, and so probably my biggest contribution early on was figuring out what the format of the show was going to be. And I'm a huge believer in that shows needs formats. And, I got to chance, I did the Canadian version of Storage Wars, which I thought was an amazing format. And I had fallen totally in love with the format. And what I loved about it is that regardless of whether or not you care about storage auctions, the format is so brilliant that I dare you not to watch the end of the episode.
Sorry, I was going to say, could you give us a little taste? I'm sure there's, unfortunately, a lot of people who haven't seen the Canadian version.
Well, yeah, but you can
Wars.
if you have Netflix, it's they've de-Canadianized it in a really funny way. It's called Northern Treasures.
Northern Treasures.
Adding it to my
So
list
you should
now.
have that list now. And what's hilarious for me anyway is that in the opening credit sequence, there's all sorts of vistas of Toronto, and they've edited those out to look like sort of a generic American city. But
Which is funny, because isn't Toronto used for like New York all the time?
yeah, exactly.
Or is that Vancouver?
No, it's both of them. But the point is, so if you haven't seen the show, basically people bid on storage lockers, and ultimately they find something, and then it gets we're told whether or not it's valuable or not. But what I loved about that show is it had this really tight format where every episode, if you set your stopwatch by it, is very much the same. And they play with that format, and they dance, they do surprising things. But I love what having a format does for you creatively, and ultimately sort of liberates you to tell a story around a skeleton that really, really works. So with Hackable, it was, how do we find a format of which, if you listen to the show, there are definitely sections, that are sort of both predictable and we play with that are surprising, but can let us tell innovative stories to the audience, sort of, playing with that.
Yeah, and I should probably have mentioned this earlier. So for any of you who haven't listened to Hackable, first of all, I need you to go right now, pause this episode, go over in your RSS feed, find Hackable, download it, listen to it, enjoy it, then come back to this one so you can enjoy the rest of this conversation. But Hackable, I love how you narratively pull us in. You say, like, this is a thing. You give us a just voice narration where our imagination does the walking for you. And then you either show us, like, oh, this was actually from a movie, or more recently, you've been showing us a lot of this actually happened in the real world. And then, as the intro music starts to play, is when you get into, this is what we're going to be tackling on this episode of Hackable. And then from there, it's just off and running, introducing how you are going to be the guinea pig. Or more recently, you're your story producer?
Yeah, story producer on the show, Pedro Mendez.
Yes. The one where you were trying to get him to pick up the USB stick, I laughed so many times. Like, I appreciate that that's slowly becoming the, also now we're showing you how a layperson could also end up doing this to you, which is, I actually thought, a very ingenious addition, because normally you'd also think hackers are doing hacks. This black hat hacker sitting in his basement with a hoodie on, cracking through like 8 screens of code, is the one who's getting into your bank account, and not just some guy who has USB sticks and downloaded a piece of software off the internet.
I'm very glad to hear that you laughed at that, because some of those episodes I feel like 20% bad about. I know Bruce was like,
yeah, there's a little bit of me who's like, it's kind of like watching America's Funniest Home Videos where someone gets hurt, where like in the back of your mind, you're like, I guess if it happened to me, I wouldn't be too pumped about it, but at least that person knows that this is going for a greater cause.
Yes, and Pedro is a very good sport about the whole thing, so I'm very grateful to have him on the show.
I actually really got to ask, is how often is he in on the joke?
Well, it sort of depends on the episode. He generally knows it's happening. He may not know the details of what's happening and how it's happening.
Well, in any event, I definitely got a kick out of that one. And I think from here, important question I have for you is, what are the things on Hackable that either of you, Bruce or Geoff, wish you could explore more, or think could give a little more to the show that you haven't gotten to do so far?
Oh, that's a great question. I always have to rein myself in when it comes to the topic of encryption. I'd love to figure out a way to get a little bit more in depth, because I still find that a lot of, encryption is such a basic component of all security. And I find that most people don't really grok it as well as I think they could. But again, it's always walking that fine line between, how do you explain it enough to where people understand it, but not too much to where their eyes glaze over. Right. And that's one that always, I'm still like, I'm searching for the right, I know there's the right way to explain it floating out there somewhere. And I one day I'm going to grab it and explain it in a way that everybody understands. But that's kind of my holy grail. And I know that's a super geeky holy grail to have when it comes to the podcast, but that's just the one thing that's just sticking in my craw.
It's a little geeky. And I say that with love and respect. So
I know.
Certainly the one, like the holy grail from me on a story point of view, is we end up, working with all of these amazing white hat hackers who, their actual job description, hold your giggles, but is penetration tester. And so what they do is they go to large corporations, basically hired them and say, hey, I want you to break into my system to see where the vulnerabilities are. And the episode I would love to do, and we've been trying to do it, and hopefully next season we'll be able to do it, is to actually accompany one of these penetration testers on a live test. Because what's super cool about it is they're not just sitting by their computer and this is obviously, Bruce will laugh at me because this is not what happens, but it's not like a Matrix level of code going by as they're madly typing. But they, one of them told me this amazing story where he does, similar to what we did with Pedro, where there's if you load a USB key up with malicious software, what he does is he goes into the main office and he'll say to the receptionist, I'm here for an interview with Jerry. I'm a little bit late. My cat peed on my printer, and so I wasn't able to print my resume. Could you do me a huge solid and just print this? And of course I will. So They stick the thing in, they print it. He takes the USB key out. He goes to meet Jerry, and Jerry's like, "Oh, it's nice to meet you. How's the penetration test going?" He's like, "Oh, it's no problem. I'm already in your system." And so there's all of these absolutely amazing social engineering things that I would love to be able to put on the show. So that's our holy grail.
And speaking of USB keys, the episode of Hackable I was mentioning where you mess with Pedro with USB keys was episode 29, Dead Drops.
Yes.
And actually, going back to that, I remember during our conversation with Bruce, we kind of talked about how the funny thing about hacking in movies is you have to make something entertaining where, and please, Bruce, do back me up on this, there's a lot of sitting around.
Oh, yeah.
There's a lot of just waiting till the right person falls for the right thing so you can go to the next thing.
Well, and it's always, there's never a guarantee that your hack is going to work. Right. So a lot of times it'll work on like the 7th time, right? Or something like that. So yeah, there is a lot of really boring sitting around. Well, boring to other people. Like I find that the time really flies by when I'm doing any sort of penetration testing. But yeah, it's definitely not that exciting for somebody that's not right in on the keyboard.
And I imagine the other hard part is trying to understand, like, I guess when a hack is successful, it's pretty straightforward. You got into the thing you're trying to get into. But when a hack isn't successful, there's that 50-50 of you are hoping that they did a good enough job that you get to go and tell them they did a good job and they, fortunately, in this one way won't get hacked. Or there's the other, do you think you got in, but you're not sure you got in? Maybe they actually came up with a very clever honeypot because they were actually aware or in some way figured out that this was happening. And you're just trying to play that, I think we're where we need to be, but I'm not sure. Or I think this didn't work because someone is smart enough to know that this is not right and not because I accidentally goofed on step 3 of trying to get a USB all over the parking lot.
Well, and that's where, a full penetration test, when it's done, it'll show you, okay, here's where I got in. Here are the 4 or 5 areas where, you're vulnerable. Here's areas where we did X, Y, and Z, and it was blocked. And we think it was blocked because of A, B, and C. But you do. It is a real, it's not one of these, I got in one time and I'm good, right? And I think that's what maybe people don't understand about the concept of penetration testing is that you're testing all, as much of the defenses as you possibly can in order to give a really good report and let your client know, where their weak spots are, where their strong spots are, so that they can, adjust their security and adjust their budget accordingly.
I like that exact thing. I imagine is what would have made it so difficult to turn that into an episode where we're trying to follow those beats while appreciating all the downtime and all the extra effort. So I definitely feel for having the brilliant idea and working hard on making sure you get the execution right. Both as a pen tester and as a podcast producer trying to make this kind of format.
I was thinking about, we spoke with one of the Mr. Robot technical consultants. And, Mr. Robot for us was kind of the holy grail of shows. And it was the show we've gone back to the Mr. Robot well so many times. And I guess if people didn't heed your advice and go hear the show in the middle of the episode, the gist is it's kind of like Mythbusters for hacking, where we take hacks from film and television and then we basically want to find out, is that true? And we find it out by me being the human guinea pig and I'm getting hacked. And so we were thrilled at one point to be able to talk with one of the Mr. Robot tech consultants. And, we're lauding praise on him about how technically accurate it is. And what he basically told us was the one area it's not technically accurate is that time, is that most hacking takes forever and it's super unexciting. So we've been lucky on the show. We definitely edit some of the episodes, and the way we edit is that often the hacks, like any presentation, it's worked a million times when you're preparing it, and then you're up on stage, and then your tech screws up. So there are definitely times where the tech screws up, and we have to stop recording, as I'm sure any podcast does. But generally speaking, the hacks we do are often sort of trivial hacks. And I say that not that they're trivial in terms of the impact, but trivial in terms of what they can do. And an example to that was we wanted to do the little webcam on your computer. Do you need to put tape on that or not? And we approached a bunch of hackers to do that. And most hackers said, I don't want to do that because it's not interesting to me. It's too easy. And so for somebody like me who's the consumer, that's what I actually want to know is, do I have to put tape over my webcam? A hacker wants, and I'm going to show that I don't know anything about anything, but a hacker wants to do some kind of back-end code exploit where, nothing blows up at the end. But what sort of works on the show are those sort of smaller hacks that can be accomplished in a shorter amount of time, but, ultimately tell me, do I need to put tape on my webcam or not?
Yeah, and I think, Bruce, I imagine, could definitely speak to this. It's a product of compounding gains. Like, there's no one hack that is necessarily the end-all be-all, like, watch this incredible domino set off all these other dominoes. But then you realize that each hack is itself a domino.
Right. And, and that was, one of the things I did at one point in my career was I did what was called technical marketing, right? And it was, what it sounds like, trying to make technology sound interesting, right? And I would often, have to set up demos of a hack and then how you would stop the hack. And the big challenge of that was actually making that interesting to the people watching it, right? Because there's a lot of little things, but there's not like one secret key that you can use to get in. And a lot of the hacks that I would do from a demonstration perspective were typically multiple ones strung together, because you've got one hack to get in, and then once you're in, then you need another hack to kind of propagate throughout the network. And then once you've got that, then you want to set up something that's going to be collecting data and sending it back to you. There's these multiple stages. So it is sometimes, I think, people, especially on movies, you'll see, somebody pounds on the keyboard and then they said, I'm in, right? And then suddenly they have access to everything. It's just not that simple, right? It's fairly complex. I think if it were that simple, everybody would be doing it.
I really actually appreciate that insight, because I think that's always ends up being what it is, isn't it? Is people always think it's that simple. It's always that Rocky montage. It's not all the work that goes into it. Right. And I want to say at the same time, thank you both so much for taking the time to talk to me and, more importantly, my audience about what it's like creating this thing that really can inform people at all levels about this new digital age we live in. And I strongly encourage anyone listening, if you haven't already, please do go check out Hackable. The Mr. Robot Spectacular is fantastic. The Dead Drop episode is fantastic. There's so much great content, and I am a huge fan. Is there any closing thoughts you'd like to leave for anyone interested in learning more about cybersecurity or just podcasting?
Well, I do. I want to take a second to just say thanks for being a fan of the podcast. I mean, it's one of those things, Geoff alluded to it earlier, where sometimes we just kind of feel like we're talking into our microphone to like yelling at the moon or something, right? Where you're not sure if anyone's actually listening. So it's been really great to hear, kind of the warm reception that we've gotten from folks like yourself, but then also on Twitter, and then emails, and then calls into the 800 number. It's really cool to see so many people being, such big fans, and I'm really just stoked to be part of it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I actually have a big beaming smile throughout this whole conversation. And I appreciate you reaching out, Cameron, and it shows me that podcasting is such a weird medium where we're all sort of creating these things and putting them out to space, and we don't really know the reaction other than to see the little download numbers. But it's actually, I think you've inspired me that there's some podcasts I love. I'm going to reach out to them and not only tell them how much I enjoy the podcast, but let them know that there is a definitive audience behind those numbers who appreciates what they do. So I thanks again. This is very cool that you reached out to us. So we totally appreciate this.
I really appreciate that. And if our listeners would like to reach out to you, where can they find you?
Twitter?
Yeah, Twitter's probably the best. I'm pretty easy. I'm at Bruce Snell, BruceSnell. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah, and I'm at Geoff Siskind, which is slightly less straightforward because Geoff, my parents made it difficult and spelled my name with a G. So it's GeoffSiskind. And you can also contact the entire team through our website, which is at hackable.com. smallstuffpodcast.com. And can I also I want to just plug our 1-800 number, which was something we got last year. And I don't know why it's the least technical thing we have, but it just tickles me because it makes me feel like I'm, I was the kind of kid who was constantly calling into radio contests and it feels so lovely to hear people's voices. So if anyone wants to call in and say anything about the show, if you have an idea or, Bruce answers questions or just to say hi, that number is 1-855-4, which is the number 4 Hackable. So 1-855-4 Hackable. And it's really been just a obscene amount of fun to hear what people think of the show.
Awesome. And I do hope that anyone listening, please do go check it out. As for us at Sweating the Small Stuff, you can find all our stuff at Small Stuff Show on social media. Our website is smallstuff.show. And if you have questions or small stuff you're sweating, whether it be about InfoSec or your favorite movies, TV, science, or you just want to get in touch, you can always reach out to us on social media or at smallstuffshow@gmail.com. And if you haven't already, I don't actually want you to leave a review for this episode. I want you to go find your closest friend, anyone you think would like to learn from Geoff Siskind and cybersecurity expert Bruce Snell. Just sit them down and let them enjoy this incredible auditory bliss that was this conversation.
Oh, this is the best day of my life.
Until then, I'm your personal brain trainer, Cameron Boozarjomehri, reminding you, from movies to media to the world around us, it's details like these that make it worth sweating the small stuff. That was awesome, guys.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, Cameron.